All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good friend Kevin Gosztola. Kevin is a journalist who writes the Dissenter blog at Firedog Lake. He is the co-host along with Rania Kalik of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure, all of which you can find at dissenter.firedoglake.com. You can also find him on Twitter at kgostola. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Kevin, I know probably a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, you and I discussed black site prisons, secret prisons in the United States have all over the globe before. I know you and I have talked about this before on the show. Spencer Ackerman has a piece up at The Guardian on a black site prison of sorts that's actually exists on the west side of Chicago, Illinois, where I used to live, where you currently live, the city of Chicago. Part of which talks about NATO protesters who were arrested and held. There's actually a connection to a Firedog Lake blogger who was arrested at NATO. Why don't you tell us all about it?
Yeah, so Ackerman's story was that there's lawyers here in the city who have had problems with their clients basically disappearing, or people who would call them for counsel later say we were disappeared inside this site. It's called Homan Square, and Homan Square is actually where some of the most notorious units in the Chicago Police Department operate, like the organized crime unit, which is the narcotics unit, and the anti-drug units, and those units are the ones that are using this facility, and they're the ones that are more aggressive in their tactics towards arrestees. So anyways, what's really blown this open is that there were 9 people back in 2012 in May, before a NATO summit, who were brought to this facility, and for a varying time, between 20 hours and about 36 hours, I want to say, were kept in this facility and denied access to their lawyers, shackled for long periods. What you're describing is there's a contributor, his name is Tar Heel Dem, who contributed a diary post and wrote about it a month after this ordeal, where he was shackled for a long period, denied access to a toilet as he was asking for it, got some food, but it was like White Castle.
That's talk about torture. Hey-oh, sorry.
right. Well, and like you're confined here, and you're getting this really awful food that can wreck your stomach, which is torture on its own.
Right.
And so he's there. So, anyways, it's black site in the way that people are disappearing. What's really odd is that the tactic the Chicago Police Department has taken to get rid of these allegations and make them go away is basically to say, well, this sort of thing happens in all kinds of facilities here in the city of Chicago. And to that, all defense lawyers would probably, and people concerned with civil liberties would be scratching their heads going, how can that be a defense for this conduct? You mean you have like characteristics of black sites at all different facilities where you bring suspects here in Chicago? Like, it's not an okay thing that we're shackling people for long periods on bars and leaving them there for 18 to 24 hours before they're allowed to talk to an attorney.
Yeah, again, it's like the fact that like, oh yeah, we do this everywhere. I mean, that's Chicago police are pretty horrible in that regard, but this is actually a whole new level of literally where the lawyers aren't able to find their clients for a long, long time, and again being shackled, held down. I know there's in the Ackerman piece there's allegations of beating by police, serious head wounds. Someone died in custody there. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think given the history of police torture in Chicago, I want to make sure that I get in here the group led by one group called We Charge Genocide, and then some other local activists here have a rally on March 2nd for a reparations ordinance, and they've been connecting this allegation of a black site just to the fact that we don't even have complete justice for previous police torture victims. So whatever is going on in this hole right now that the police have been been able to do, because basically the press ignore any sort of whispering or any sort of discussion of it. I mean, lawyers wanted the press to cover Homan Square, and it was totally ignored by the press, and then it got forced out in the open by The Guardian here. And so anyways, they're trying to get this reparations ordinance passed for police tortured survivors.
Yeah, we actually had Miriam Kaba on the show talking about that not that long ago. People can go back and listen to the how Chicago police tortured people. Interestingly enough, though, you mentioned the media and how the media is pretty much in Chicago has ignored this for a long, long time. How is the Chicago? You actually had a post. How has the Chicago media responded to the Guardian story? Because it's pretty telling.
Well, I think my favorite reaction may have been the WGN radio show. The host, Ro Khan, who has an afternoon show, who actually looked at the story and decided to isolate and kill the messenger, because Brian Church is one of the NATO 3. He did go on trial. He was charged with terrorism charges. He was acquitted. He did get convicted of some significant misdemeanor offenses, and I think one of them might have been a felony too, for action. But anyways, they killed his message, trying to say that this guy was a troublemaker who came to protest, and they were laughing and mocking him and saying things like, "Oh, you think it was bad at Homan Square? Well, what if you were interrogated by ISIS? How do you think they would handle you?" And laughing and chuckling, and that was how they decided to treat serious allegations of police abuse. But basically, most of the media has kind of yawned and also been upset at The Guardian. I think, they feel like this is their territory, and we will decide what police corruption is and is not, and they resent the fact that a newspaper that they see as being British, although this is all coming out of their U.S. section. I just want to make that clear that this is an American journalism story. Spencer Ackerman is doing this from the United States. This isn't like an occupying force has come into Chicago to force us to grapple with some non-existent police corruption. I don't know, they seem to think it's like RT coming in and making up some weird theory that has no basis in fact. But, it's a real thing, but the media is very cool to actually investigate it and take it more seriously, and they also are trying to distract attention from it by saying things like, "Oh, well, lawyers say this happens in all kinds of facilities." So that is that diminishes the outrage about whatever might be happening at Homan, and it's very unclear what actually happens in this facility.